Is it your goal to become fluent in 2025? And do you want results as quickly and easily as possible? I've interviewed experts from around the world to help you become fluent fast. And in this English Fluency Masterclass, these experts are going to share their best advice with you. When I'm working with students, the number one concern that they have is that they don't feel confident speaking. They feel like they're being judged by native speakers. They're worried about their grammar mistakes. They're worried that their accents are too thick. And all of this prevents them from speaking confidently. So what advice would you give to these students?
Okay, well, you mentioned several things there. First of all, thick accent. As long as you are comprehensible, your accent is fine. We have to accept that. Obviously, if we can get closer to sort of native pronunciation, we have to want to in a way. We want to imitate the way the natives speak, but we have to realize, and I realize, that I will never be mistaken for a native speaker in the languages that I have learned. So accept the fact that you have an accent. Also, accept the fact that you're going to forget. I mean, we know if I'm in some place and somebody shows up whom I know, but what's his name or her name, the more pressure I put on myself to try to remember that person's name, the more likely I am not to remember. And later on, when there's no pressure on me, oh yeah, that was George or Sally. So obviously, there is a certain amount of pressure, tension when we speak, because it's always more comfortable to speak in your own language. So you're speaking in another language, there's a little more tension, and so it's a little more difficult to remember things. We just have to accept that. All of that is normal. It's normal not to understand. It's normal to forget. And if we simply keep going, we will gradually improve. The more pressure we put on ourselves, or if we try to avoid speaking because we're afraid, then we aren't going to improve. So, I mean, it's easy to say, but I have experienced it in many languages where I struggle. And sometimes we think we did more poorly than we in fact did. And we just have to give ourselves credit. Trust the brain. The brain will gradually learn given enough experience. And you just have to keep going.
So let me first tell you that this is a very human thing to be scared of, getting out of your comfort zone. When we get out of our comfort zone, we're always scared. That's the first thing. So it's completely normal to be scared or slightly anxious about the mere fact of having to have a conversation with a native speaker. So that's the first thing to take into account. The second thing to take into account is that I foresee like these three zones. You have the comfort zone at the beginning, right? So that's where you stand, where you're like sitting in the corner, you're learning vocabulary, but you don't want to venture out there and have, talk to people. Then you have there's another layer or zone around that zone, which I call it's called the Goldilocks zone. So it's slightly challenging, but it's not too challenging. I'll give you a concrete example in a second. And then you have the panic zone. The panic zone is where you're completely out of your comfort zone so far that you panic because it's too difficult. An example. So your comfort zone is, let's say, whoever is listening, if you've been learning a language for a little bit and or for a long time for that matter, English, and you still find it difficult, you still tremble at the idea of speaking to someone, or you're interacting with someone, but you don't express yourself smoothly because your mind goes blank and you think, oh my God, they're judging me, I'm making mistakes, you think about grammar, all those things that make it difficult. Then think about this. Your comfort zone is sitting in front of a computer and making maybe lists of words or maybe watching something passively, right? So that is an excuse of, oh, I'm engaging with the language, but I'm not actually talking to people. Then you have what I call the Goldilocks zone. It's a good zone. It's a good zone to be in. And you tell yourself, okay, I'm scared. Fine, normal. But I could hire a tutor, a very nice and friendly person with whom I could have a conversation. It's a protected environment because you're paying whether you're paying someone or you find someone you can have a conversation with, maybe on Skype. There is no background noise. That person knows that you're a learner. And then you can have a conversation. You can prepare beforehand about a topic you're interested in, and you can have a meaningful conversation. That's a gray zone that you can get in, a gray zone, but a good zone to be in, so that you can actually step out of your comfort zone progressively.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's definitely something that is not that easy to overcome. But one thing that I would try to imagine is that if this person that I'm talking to is also learning like a second language. For example, if this person is learning my native tongue, which is Mandarin, would I care that this person make mistakes? I probably wouldn't care that much. And I would think that this person is very brave. And then like he or she is willing to try to actually speak such a difficult language. So I think with this mindset, I will feel more at ease when I am going to speak with people. And when I actually make mistake, I would feel like most of the people would just understand it. And there are going to be some people who just wouldn't understand it and feel like, how could you make such a simple mistakes and things like that? There are always going to be people like that, but I would just ignore that kind of people and like basically think that, oh, those kind of people, they just don't understand the difficulty and challenge of learning a foreign language. So yeah, that's basically how like the mindset that helps me to overcome this kind of fear of trying to speak with someone in their native tongue. Especially when I'm still in the beginner stage.
I think when it comes to fear, I mean, I don't know what you think, but I think a lot of native speakers are not so judgmental. They're very rarely going to correct your grammar, because most native speakers may not know how to do that. So they're probably not going to correct your grammar. They won't correct your accent or laugh at your accent. I think by and large, most native speakers are kind of open-minded with that and are not going to have a problem with that. I think where the problem comes is where if because of your grammar mistakes or your accent or pronunciation, communication breaks down and they don't understand what you're trying to say, then yes, there's going to be a problem. And they'll be like, oh, well, I don't want to speak to them. I can't communicate with them. And so there is that problem that if communication breaks down, but communication can break down in different situations, right? It can break down due to mistakes, but it can also break down if you just go quiet or speak slowly. Some students don't want to make a mistake, so they go very slowly and they do each word by word, and then communication breaks down because the listener is not following what you're saying or is getting bored and walks away. So I think there's a balance between the accuracy and the fluency. You don't want to be thinking too much about your mistakes. Just try and communicate, just speak out, go with the flow, but be aware that if you are making a lot of mistakes, you'll see it in the eyes of the listener that the communication is broken down. So you need that kind of balance of just speaking out, going with the flow, but being aware you're not making too many mistakes, grammatically, vocabulary, or pronunciation mistakes. So that balance is an important one.
It's really like a language learner thing to even think that that someone's going to care that you made a mistake, right? Because the first point is you're just speaking, it's just communication. And then you have to consider how many native speakers that you meet have never studied any other language before. So they don't even know what they're talking about. So you speak to them and they might say, oh, what did you say? Oh, I didn't understand. They just don't have any experience talking to foreign people, and they don't have any experience with different accents. If a person from the other side of the country came to them, they would hear that person say, oh, you have an accent. They would say the same thing to a person who's a native speaker. So a lot of times non-native students who are learning English and come to the United States, for example, they'll get discouraged, upset, frustrated about this, that people might hear their accent and ask them to repeat something. God forbid someone asked me to repeat something. Native speakers ask other native speakers to repeat stuff all the time. It's not an issue. But yeah, so I think especially the rules, when you're really focused on rules and being correct, then it can really hold you back, because you're thinking about the speech and the language a lot more than the people who you're talking to.
If you had to boil down the qualities or personality traits of successful language learners, what would you say those are?
Well, obviously, motivation is big. The motivation, I would say attitude is big. So motivation is one thing. Confidence, enjoying the language learning process. All of those things are part of that positive attitude. And I also think it's very important not to be a perfectionist. Very important to accept, fuzziness, incertitude. You don't quite understand. You keep forgetting the same words. And all of that is fine because you're enjoying the process of discovering another language.
And you mentioned confidence. I'm going to ask you a follow-up because many of my students tell me that they lack confidence when using their English. So can you speak a little bit more about the role that confidence has when learning and using a foreign language?
Confidence is huge. And that's why I put a great amount of emphasis on listening and reading. And you sometimes hear people say, well, I can read, but I have trouble speaking. But most of those people don't realize just how much you need to read and listen. Like you have to read a book, 200, 300 pages, one book, several books. And the brain starts to get used to the language. And reading is so easy to do. And when we read, it's almost as if we're speaking because we are sort of subconsciously vocalizing as we read. And also listening. And so if you build up this degree of confidence with the language, the brain is used to the language, the brain has formed a model of the language. When you go to speak, of course you're going to struggle at first, but you will gradually improve because you have all these words inside you. So I think part of it is being better prepared. Most people don't put the time and effort into reading and listening. They desperately try to remember some grammar rules and they try to think of grammar rules while they're speaking, which is hopeless. And then they have to accept that when they're speaking, they're actually practicing speaking and they will gradually get better. And while they're speaking, if they're speaking to people that matter to them, they're getting very valuable input, which is also all part of training the brain to be comfortable in the language.
They find the context and they find an objective. So in my case, I've been kind of blessed to be able to speak 5 or 6 languages on a daily basis because that's just the people in my company. They speak them. But looking back, my best periods of language learning really happened when I had a context through which to learn a language. So if I had a girlfriend that spoke the language, or maybe flatmates, or I was working at a company where the language was spoken, and I think that is by far the best way to be learning the language. So having a context where you don't actually have to make an effort, and you're kind of confronted with the language, whether you like it or not. And then the second thing is an objective. So let's say I learned Russian to a reasonable intermediate degree before meeting my wife, who is Russian speaking, and then I put it to myself as an objective to make my Russian really perfect so that I could speak with my in-laws, with her parents, in an unconstrained sort of free flowing way. And that was a fantastic source of motivation. So different people will find different sources of motivation, whether it's relationships or sports or business, but it's really important to have an objective.
Now, one thing I hear from my students a lot is that they've been learning for years and years, and they feel like they've gained a lot of vocabulary, gained a lot of grammar, but when they go to use it in a conversation, like we're having a conversation right now, their mind goes blank, they forget all their words, they're shy, they're nervous, and they're not able to communicate. Whereas right now you are communicating very successfully. So did you struggle with that? How did you overcome that? And how would you recommend that my students who are experiencing that issue can overcome that as well?
Well, there are two ways. Like there's a passive vocabulary and there's an active vocabulary. Well, in terms of active vocabulary, I learned vocab, as I had mentioned, by jotting down a lot of beautiful expressions and putting on my wall and deliberately practicing them. What I mean by that, I would sit in front of the mirror and I would take expression. Let's say people have different likes and dislikes. That's one, the expression, yeah? I would flexibly use it. Like people have different likes and dislikes when it comes to reading books, yeah? Some people like different types of genres, while others like different types of genres. So by using great language chunks, and deliberately practicing them in front of the mirror, I was able to actively use my vocab. And it's okay to forget vocab. It's okay. It's all about the process. And it also comes down to confidence. Look, people should not be very shy in front of people because everybody's going through something. Everybody's learning this language. How can you be shy when learning language? It's very bad. So you have to first of all tell yourself, hey, everybody's going through. It's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to forget vocab. And it's okay to feel embarrassed from time to time. And in this way, you build confidence. That's what I used to do. I went through a lot. It's not okay. It's not easy to wake up at the same time, go to bed at the same time. It was not easy to study for 6 to 12 hours a day. It was not easy to feel embarrassed when I was giving lectures. It was not easy. But by learning from my mistakes, I learned. And I am still learning. I sometimes cannot use vocab, but that's okay. It's, as I had mentioned, it's a lifelong learning. So yeah.
I would say, I think most of the time we are really afraid of making mistakes. And it is like mainly because like how we have been taught in school, I guess, because we are asked to take a lot of exams and maybe you have to say something in front of a lot of people, like in front of your classmates. And when you say something wrong, your teacher will try to correct you. I mean, I think with a good intention to start with, but most of the time it will kind of scare you. And then you will have this like trauma that you don't want to experience this again. So I would say like most of the time when we like couldn't really say something, even though we want to, it's because we are afraid of making mistakes. So like later, I also experienced that a lot when I'm like in the beginner stage of a language. So I actually like just like push myself and even like give myself a rule that, you know, like today I'm here to make mistakes. If I do not make at least one mistake here, like tonight in this like session, then I'm not reaching my goal. So I'm not like, my goal is never like, I couldn't make any mistakes tonight. I have to make perfect sentences all the time. It's never like that. It's always like, I need to make at least one mistake today. And that's the end. Like that's the goal of like my language learning that day. So yeah, I use that kind of like mindset to push myself to make as many mistakes as possible, because this is how you can actually say something when you're practicing speaking with others, because it's just so difficult, especially when you are talking with a native speaker. They speak really fast. You really don't have time. It's not like when you write or when you listen, you have more time to think through it and then to check whether like you understand it or not, or like your grammar and things like that. Like when it's like very fast, then you have to just make mistakes to make yourself to improve. Yeah.
That's very powerful. I'm here to make mistakes. I'm here to make mistakes. I think everyone should write that down, remember it, say it every day, not just with languages, with anything in life, anything that you're trying to do. Because if you're not making mistakes, like you said, you're probably not trying very hard. You're probably not pushing yourself. That's very powerful. I'm here to make mistakes. Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Now, to answer your question, we're not going to delve into neuroscience, although I'm really passionate about how the brain works. And if you understand how the brain works, it gives you an incredible insight into why we have these problems when speaking a foreign language, or even our own native language for that matter. But to make it simple, this is the reason why all this works. All this happens, In our mind, we process language learning when we still do not speak a language well. So we're not talking about our native language, we're talking about foreign language. We use this part of the brain which is called prefrontal cortex. This is how we think consciously, how we plan things when we try to retrieve words, when we try to think about grammar, etc., etc. Then we have another part of the brain, which is called the limbic system, that has to do with, let's say, emotions. This is an oversimplification of how this works, but just to show you a metaphor of how, like, you have two competing, let's say, parts of the brain. One is trying to process, to think about words, to arrange them together, to think about grammar, and the other part, which is the emotional part, fights against this part. So if you're tense, and subconsciously, we walk into a conversation, whether it's with a tutor or with people outside, there's a level of tension that, unfortunately, where the amygdala is involved, and not only the amygdala, that keeps this part of the brain, let's say, keeps it from communicating well with other parts of the brain. So imagine that this part of the brain wants to grab a word somewhere, fetch a word with a mechanical arm, but the other part just keeps it from doing that. If you're stressed, if you're anxious, if you walk into any conversation with the idea that you're going to be judged and everything, all the negative things that you think concerning a conversation, this is bound to happen. This has happened to me a number of times recently. Just to give you a very concrete example, I've been learning Serbian for 2 years. I had a conversation with my colleague who's Serbian American, and I've been learning the language for 2 years. I understand it pretty well. We recorded a conversation for YouTube. I could not say the simplest things. Like, he asked me, "Are you ready?" I was like, I couldn't even say, "Yes, I am," in Serbian. And I realized, how is that possible? And because the knowledge is there, but it's blocked. So it's something that happens all the time. Our mind goes blank because we are anxious and we are in this mode, in this very negative mode. My suggestion is, once again, what I said before, is that to establish, if you're anxious about having a conversation with a native speaker, find one person, a friendly person, not necessarily competent, a friendly person. You are really excited. You think, oh, I'm going to talk to Jennifer or Luca or Mark about whatever excites you. And when that happens, when you focus more on the communication than the performance, your level of stress is going to go down, and then your mind will go blank, because this is inevitable. It's a background noise that you're not going to eliminate, but it's going to happen less and less when you're talking with that person.
My first piece of advice would be to relax. So of course it's going to happen, and not only with language learning or speaking a language that you don't speak so well, but also speaking your own language. So you and I speak English, and all of a sudden somebody asks us to give a presentation in front of 5,000 people. We are starting to forget our words and become anxious and so on. So it's just, it's something that happens to everybody. The second thing would be, you already speak the language. So it's just a matter of level, fluency, number of errors, and so on. So it's a continuum. So there's no switch that happens between I cannot speak the language, I'm not confident, and I can speak the language and I can deliver a physiology presentation. So it's a continuum, and it's important to find not quick wins, but wins along the way. So if you are just starting to learn the language, so maybe understanding a 3-minute episode of something on YouTube would be great. And then maybe later on, having a phone call in the language, maybe the next step, and so on and so on and so on. So having these milestones, I think, really helps, because that way you convince yourself also that you are progressing, irrespective of how it might look at certain times.
You have to remember, first of all, very often you hear people talk about, I'm going to master the basics. We forget even the most basic words. We forget the most basic structures. We forget things that we used to be able to do and now we can't do all of a sudden. We may be able to do it the next time. So the first thing is to accept that. That is absolutely normal. And it's part of the process of communicating. But gradually, even the process of forgetting and relearning is solidifying that capability in your brain. Research into the brain, we need to see something, notice something, forget it for a while, go back to it, forget it again, go back to it. And slowly, that is how we accumulate words that we can comfortably use. So forgetting is part of the process and shouldn't make us feel uncomfortable. We say, good, I forgot, good, and now I relearn it. And maybe I forget it again, good, and then I relearn it. And gradually we improve.
That's an amazing attitude to have. By forgetting, you are in fact learning. Not only is it normal to forget things, but it's beneficial. So changing your attitude around it. I hope all my students remember that lesson. What a powerful lesson.
Let's make that practical. So for English, what would be a phrase that you have in your vocabulary that you memorize that you can use when you feel stuck or when your mind goes blank?
So for example, if I'm like going to say something, like usually if it's someone that I've never met before, and usually that's going to be the case. And then it's about, maybe I would just say like where I'm from and what I'm doing right now. And I would just like imagine people will be very curious about, for example, I'm a YouTuber right now. So they will be thinking, wow, so what do you do? And then I will start to just like memorize phrases such as, oh, I create videos about the topics of travels and language learning and self-development and things like that. So I think these subjects and topics, like we could imagine in advance, like what would people be curious about and prepare them in advance. And for other things, like for example, like a group of people are talking and like you are just maybe just listening and you're trying to agree with them. So I think I find phrases such as, yeah, I think so too. Yeah, that's so cool. Wow, that's amazing. Things like that to be very useful, because sometimes even if I don't really understand 100% what people are saying, like in the group, I can still say that sentences, and usually it's not going to be a weird sentences that people will find out that you actually don't really know what they are talking about. So I use this kind of techniques to get by like my speaking session with others.
How would you start that if a student came to you and said, a language learner came to you and said, I memorize 10, let's just say 10 phrasal verbs. I watch a video, I learn them, and then a few days later, I can't remember any of them. How would you start to help that person to retain, to keep that information?
Yeah. So, people have different study techniques, but, study techniques doesn't necessarily mean that you're employing memory techniques. And really the problem that most people have when they sit down to memorize something is they don't have a real process other than possibly some kind of rote repetition thing, which can work with a lot of dedicated repetition. That is proven to work. But when you're talking about language where you have so many things that need to be in your head to be able to speak to a certain degree of fluency, you need to know thousands of words, cases and conjugations and idioms and all that sort of stuff. It's not realistic to necessarily be able to review it to the extent that repetition would just suffice, so memory techniques need to jump in there and kind of carry the load. So the first thing that people need to understand is you need a way of organizing the information that you're putting in your head and making it relatable to things that you already know, that you can visualize in your mind. And think and see in terms of pictures rather than these abstract things, which with a foreign language, it's generally speaking, mostly abstract because it's in another language. Your native language, and this is not that. So when you look at this word that you're trying to learn, let's say, it just looks like gibberish. It's meaningless. So the first step to memorizing anything, honestly, is to take that thing and to try to convert it into some kind of mental picture that makes sense to you, that lights up your interest. And then the next step is to kind of like, how do I store it in my mind in a way that it's easier to retrieve later? And there's different approaches to do that, but that's generally the idea. The last step is the review, that you can't get around the review. Unfortunately, our brains are designed to forget things over time, but it remembers the things that we frequent a lot in our heads. That shouldn't make sense, right? But again, it's with memory techniques, you can kind of reduce the amount of review that needs to be done and how often, because it's such a lot more stickier inside the mind.
Great point. So trying to think of this myself, let's say I'm trying to learn the word, there's a lamp right in front of me. So I'll just use that as an example. So I'm trying to learn the word lamp in a foreign language. So I see a picture of a lamp in my head. Do I have that right so far?
Yeah, that's part of it. So obviously there's the word that you will either hear or see if you're reading it in this other language. So I don't know, is there a language as an example you want to use?
Yeah, Spanish. I know a little bit of Spanish, and it's something that I'm casually learning. Many words I do not know, lots that I don't remember when I need them as well.
I don't know what the word is for lamp in Spanish. Do you?
Nor do I.
All right, I'm going to look it up and we're going to do it right now.
Okay,
Lamp
sounds good. I'm sure all the Spanish speakers are laughing at me because they know I just spent 6 months in a Spanish-speaking country and I don't even know the word for lamp.
But lamp is, I think, that's kind of a specific, like
True.
Light is different,
True,
like
that's a good point. That's a good point.
Okay, so it's lampara, maybe?
Lampara, okay.
Maybe there's different Spanish-speaking countries say different things, but let's say that's the word we're learning. Okay. That's maybe not the best example actually, because it has the word lamp in it. But in general, you would look at this word and think of what it reminds you of in terms of sound, or even what the letters look like together, and come up with a picture for that, relating it to what it actually means, which in this case is a lamp. So in this specific example, lampara again has the word lamp in it. So that probably would give you a clue if you saw the word lampara that it is a lamp. The other way, going the other direction, is, the way I just asked you, how do you say lamp in Spanish? You want to say lamp, and you don't know, you'd have to remember lampara, right? So maybe the tricky part here is the ending, ara, right? So you'd come up with an image for that and kind of weave it into a picture that you have of a lamp in your mind. So ara, what does that mean to you? It's kind of a meaningless thing, but you can come up with something that it kind of sounds like or reminds you of, like maybe it's an arrow.
Okay.
In English, A-R-A, ara, arrow, or era, up to you, right? And then with that, let's say it's arrow. It's not the same, but it's close enough to give you a cue to know what it is. So my lamps in my head, when I'm thinking in Spanish, would have an arrow shot through it, right?
Oh.
Okay. So now I have a cue when I think, okay, lamp, Spanish. Oh, there's an arrow through it. Okay, lampara, lamp arrow, lampara, right? And that's kind of the idea here, is we're kind of making little tricks here for remembering these meaningless things via the things that are meaningful to us. A good example, can I give you another example?
Absolutely, I love one.
Yeah, so in French, for example, we have for dog is chien, okay? Doesn't sound like dog in this case. It's not dogara, right? So two very different words meaning the same thing. So with the French word chien, okay, if you ever were to read it, it kind of reads like chain a little bit. It's C-H-I-E-N, or feminine, it's a bit different, but chien, okay? So I might look at that word and say, okay, I'm going to picture a chain attached to a dog in this case, right? Which would kind of make sense. A dog is on a chain attached. It's like a ferocious dog. And the more you make these images in your mind come alive, like picture this rabid dog with sharp teeth, like trying to kill you, but he's thankfully attached to this chain. Maybe the chain even breaks, right? And now you're terrified for your life. Or maybe it's funny because it's a tiny little dog and it's strapped to this massive chain. Like, why would it even need that? You can make kind of silly images. But next time I see that word chien, I'll think chain, I'll think dog, Now, this approach is only just a crutch, right? To get you to a point where ultimately at some point you've practiced this so much through your review and speaking and reading, whatever, that this chain link won't be necessary anymore. You'll just know chain or chien is dog.
So why don't you tell my students how you achieved such a high level of fluency in a short period of time? Did you have a secret process you followed, or what was your approach? What was your methodology to get these results?
Well, first of all, before embarking on this beautiful journey, I started eliminating all unnecessary distractions I had. First of all, social media. I only started using social media for educational purposes, like TikTok, not gonna happen. YouTube, okay, let's use that for educational purposes, like watching YouTubers, like you watching professional teachers and so forth. That's what I did. And also I started eliminating like my toxic environment. At that time, I used to have a toxic environment. I told myself, if I wanted to improve myself, why not eliminate and eradicate all unnecessary distractions? So that's what I did. After that, I also created a study area, which was like putting over like vibrant sticky notes on my walls and jotting down beautiful expressions, idiomatic language, phrasal verbs. I've sent you some photos. You could show them like to students. You believe it or not, it helped me to study for 6 to 12 hours a day. I became obsessed with the process. I had a study table, I had a study bedroom, and I would like study continuously every single day. I spiced it up. I was not in a hurry to improve my language skills, but instead I enjoyed the process. I would visualize and picture my future. I would think about how many opportunities I would have if I reach this level. Okay, so let's study. So this is what really helped me to study, not only for many, many hours, but also to increase the quality of my language acquisition, I would even say.
So how did you personally improve your speaking skills?
I feel like I'm sure you said this in your videos once, but you know how when you're writing it down or like you're reading, it's like no one's actually listening to you say it, so you're a little more confident in like doing it right. But when you try to say it in front of someone, especially like a native speaker, you suddenly just feel anxious and you start and your mind just goes, what if I make mistakes, or like what if I mess this up? That's something like that. I'll be honest, that happened to me. Like it used to when I was younger, but now growing up, like I've been a lot more confident with this. I feel like I'm more nervous if I speak my native language. Those are the thoughts that run through my mind speaking my native language than they do speaking English. So I think one thing is just don't let yourself become anxious, or like don't fear making mistakes, because everyone makes mistakes. We're all human beings. That happens. Just don't be worried about like, if I mess this up, is someone gonna judge me? If they do, I say let them. That's what people are going to do. So don't worry about people's opinions. If you're doing it, you're doing it for yourself. You should be doing it for yourself. So like you don't have to worry about that. If like, I think a tip to improve your speaking skills, something that definitely worked for me, is speak to yourself. It doesn't even have to be like formal. You don't have to be sitting in front of a mirror. So one thing I do, this is more of a habit of mine at this point, but I'd be like reading a book, I'll be watching a movie or like a TV show, and something's gonna happen, and I'm gonna sit there for 5 minutes rambling to myself on and on and on about the situation. I could be alone in the room or in the house, and I'll still keep going. So for me, it's become more of a habit. I can't stop myself from it. So I do definitely think don't be nervous about doing that. It's like normal. It definitely helped me. So just like try speaking to yourself first. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. It happens. Just like relax yourself. Just speak. It doesn't matter if you make mistakes. It's completely fine. If you want to, like you can always, like I said, you can. If you're like preparing for something, like you're preparing for a speech or like an interview, you can always stand in front of the mirror, try to practice it, or like you can, it can eventually build into a habit like it did for me. But as you're reading, as you're listening, you should just let yourself express your opinions and ideas, even if it's just you. You don't have to have someone there with you to speak to. You can always speak to yourself.
I'm so glad you said that. And that's definitely advice I share with all my students. And that is what I do as well. I speak to myself all the time. It's a great way to prepare, it's a great way to practice. And when I was learning foreign languages, I always spoke to myself in that foreign language because I didn't have access to other people, but I always had access to myself. So it's just an easy thing to do. And I'm glad you do that. And I'm glad you recommend it as well.
Basically, first of all, Jennifer, I, pointed out the gray areas in my language on which I had to, work upon. And then I started consulting quality material for improving, my language skills, for improving my grammar. I started reading newspapers. I started, listening to podcasts. And most importantly, I want to mention here two things which I did, which really helped me in improving my language skills. And number one is diary writing. I used to write diary a lot. At the end of the day, I would sit down and write about my daily routine, how did my day went on, so it helped me in refining my language skills. Point number one. Second, I started speaking with my fellows, with my teachers. Students feel very much hesitant, or they don't feel at ease while speaking with their fellows. But in my case, I thought, let people say what they want. Because, as I mentioned, that students are not motivated to speak. If people from my country are listening to this, I want to tell them we should motivate students. So when they are not motivated to speak, they don't really improve themselves. So what I did was I started speaking with my fellows at the university, with my teachers. So it provided me confidence to refine my language skills more and more. And that is the way I, gain a lot of confidence regarding my English language. Yeah.
Excellent points. And I've recommended this to all my students. You've probably heard me say you should keep a journal, diary, journal. They're the same thing. Keep a journal, write about your daily routine, summarize your day, which is exactly what you did. And also you said you just practiced speaking with people who were available to you. Now, what if there's a student watching right now and they say, but Zeeshan, but Jennifer, I don't have anyone available to me. I work from home. I live in a non-English speaking country. There is nobody I can speak to. What advice would you give to that student?
I think that the modern methods and technologies have created, a lot of space for such people, who are working from home. You can book a tutor online nowadays, and you can have a conversation with him. You can select a topic of mutual interest, and then you guys can go on speaking about it. And if you're working from home, of course you have your family members, your siblings, brothers, sisters, and all those. You should start speaking in English with them. So in that way, you would be refining not only your language and communication skills, but they will also be getting benefit out of it. Nowadays, I think it's not an excuse, if I'm allowed to say.
So let's go back to when you were in acting school, because this is so interesting to me. So you were in acting school with native English speakers as well. Can you tell me, what was your experience trying to improve your pronunciation or reduce your accent compared to a native speaker trying to do that? I just imagine if I had to learn to speak with a Texas accent or a British accent, I think that would be very difficult for me. So how do you think that experience was different for you and native speakers you were doing this training with?
That's a great question. I think that, first of all, I always felt a little inferior because it was like always, it's so easy for them, right? It wasn't just, the exercises and the sentences that we had to read, some of them were so complicated to me, also in a semantic level. Like, I didn't understand what it meant because it was like all these old school vocabulary, and they kind of like, they just read it and I had to read it before everyone else like 10 times in my head to be able to say it confidently, and even then I wasn't confident. So I felt like I had to catch up to even be close to where they were at. At the same time, I feel like that gave me an incentive and motivation to do this work. And I worked a lot harder than everyone else, which, of course, benefited me because I developed this. I became a very diligent student. I did the work. It impacted not just my my pronunciation, but also my self-esteem and how I perceived myself as a learner, because I did the work, I showed up, I was consistent because I wanted to catch up with them. And I think that because of that, my improvement was pretty fast. And I also studied privately with two of my teachers so that I could, between the first year and the second year, I took a lot of private classes so that I would, at least have the same ability to have conversational English. And I think that work has paid off. The only thing that I think was a huge struggle was how the language was not immediate to me, right? Like, especially when we had to improvise or when we had to speak in class about how we feel and things like that. Like, it was very easy for them to communicate. And for me, the language was not that available. I was self-conscious about how it sounded. I did all this pronunciation work. So I was always like in my head, listening to myself from the outside. And I felt like I wasn't fully expressive. I wasn't able to express myself as fully as my colleagues. So I think that was also a challenge that I had to face. And I think that's the thing, like non-native speakers, they, in many situations at work, when writing emails in global companies, in acting schools, at universities, they probably need to work harder than their native peers if the environment is in English. But it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to kind of like understand how to work with those thoughts and make sure that we don't see ourselves as victims, but only as, people with the power to do those things that we want and to change.
Now, what would you say to that student who wants to sound more advanced in English, but their fluency isn't there yet? What should they do? Just focusing on the words that they now know, or should they focus on trying to add more words? What strategies do you have for that student?
It has to be both of those. I think it has to be in conversations, focus on the fluency, focus on using the words that you know. And because if you're using language you're comfortable with, you're going to feel more confident and you're going to be speaking more fluently. In the background, of course, you always need to be studying and learning, expanding your vocabulary, the grammar that you use up to a higher level. So you always want to be curious to learn new language and to grow the level that you're at. So you need both of those activities. And I kind of make it sound like they're two separate activities. And by and large, they may be, but they may be intermingled. You may be having a conversation with someone and they use an expression you've never heard. And you say, well, that's interesting. And then at the end of the conversation, you just make a note and say, oh, I must remember that. It's really good. So they may be intermingled, but I think you need to do both things.
Yeah, that's great advice. And in reality, that sounds like how we would learn basically anything or improve any skill. Because if you're going to the gym, you focus on the exercises but every day you might try to push yourself a little bit more, run a little longer, or lift heavier weights. And it's just always a gradual process in basically everything that we do in improving.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I love the comparison to the gym. I think a lot of the English workout practice is like being at a gym, right? Repetitions and repetitions, but then you increase the weight, you're increasing the complexity of the vocabulary maybe, but not too much, step by step.
Are you done learning? Do you still sit down and formally learn the language, or do you feel you've achieved the result that you want with your English skills?
No, I don't think, I'm not gonna say I'm done learning. I don't ever want to be like done with it, because I think this, I will definitely say there's a difference between when you have to learn something like you don't want to, and there's something you want to learn, something you want to do for yourself. So that's definitely like me and English. Like if I'd say if it was like something like if it was a school subject, maybe a subject I didn't necessarily like, I definitely would be like, okay, I'm done learning this. This is all I'll ever need. I'm done. But I feel like this is something I'm not gonna be done with. I'm definitely going to continue. I like I said, I never actually formally tried to learn it. I just more of I went with it. So I definitely, when I say I'm not done learning, it's in a sense that I still like to read. I still like to watch movies or shows in it. Sometimes I like open up a dictionary and look for words. Sometimes I like to search up synonyms of words I feel like I use a lot. So I'll try to like search up synonyms, try to replace the words with something a little different. It always helps like with vocabulary and pronunciation too, and writing, speaking. I feel like it just helps a lot. So yeah, I don't think I'm done.
Good answer, because we are all lifelong learners. We should never stop learning. So I'm glad you're committed to keep improving, keep learning. And I asked you that just because a lot of students, they really want to know, okay, when is that timeline in the future that I will be fluent and therefore done with English? That seems to be what they have. There's going to be some date in the future, maybe 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, where they're done with English. They're fluent. They've achieved the result. They can move on with their life. But I still learn new words, new ways to communicate, better ways to share my ideas. And I'm a native speaker, so I'm glad you're committed to that lifelong learning as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
There's just like you can never be done with it. If you think you're done, well, you're actually done for. Like that's it. You're gonna forget what you learned like 6 months later. That's just over for you. All that work just goes to waste.
What a clever thing to say. If you think you're done for.
You're done for.
In English, to be done for means like you're finished,
it's over for you.
Longer, you're not successful anymore, you're out of the game, you're done for. So that's a very clever phrasing. I love that. If my students were to only do one thing this week to help them improve their fluency in English, what should they do?
I would say put in the time, which in most cases is going to mean input activities, because that's easy to organize. You know, I carry my iPhone with me. I use Link. I've got my lessons there. I can listen to them. I have a playlist. If I'm sitting in the doctor's office, I can look up words and read something. So I'm engaging with the language in that way. So wherever you have an opportunity, input. However, when you have an opportunity to output, to speak, absolutely take advantage of it, and don't worry about how you do. And trust your instincts. Come out with whatever you got. That's what you have. Let it come out. Interact with people. You'll get some feedback, and you just keep going. So input activities wherever you have the opportunity, and output activities wherever you have the opportunity.
I would definitely recommend doing shadowing practice, because I really like this practice myself. For those who don't know what shadowing practice is, basically, like, to put it very simple, is that you pick like either an article with an audio version of it, or like a video. I think it would be easier that with a topic that really interests you, and then like also with subtitles, and then you just like follow along with it. You can pause it, and then just like repeat after it, and then you just do it again and again and again. And I really like to do this practice because I think it's a great way to practice my pronunciation, and also it really helps me to be more confident with myself, especially when it comes to speaking, because I think the more you speak, and then the more you are used to pronouncing like this language, English, then it's easier for you, like when you actually meet someone in real life, to open your mouth, because you will no longer feel like it's that scary. And then you will realize that your pronunciation is actually not that bad after you practice this like shadowing practice. So I really like this practice myself, and I would really recommend it to everyone.
I would say to focus on the joy of actually whatever they're doing, whether they're speaking, whether they're writing, whether they're reading, whether they're listening, whether they're watching a YouTube video like this one, to have joy, to think about the joy of learning instead of I have to do this because I have to learn. It's more like I want to do this. I think that once again, yes, techniques and strategies, they're important, but this mindset shift that you need to have in order to take things further is one of the most powerful things and factors when it comes to success in learning English or any other language for that matter.
Listening and speaking are connected. They are both connected. The more you listen to something, the better you get at speaking. But it doesn't mean the fact that you shouldn't speak. You have to speak. And I'm 100% sure that student has time. On the way, you could talk to yourself. If you are feeling embarrassed, just put on your earphones and start talking so that people know you're talking with somebody. Yes? Before going to bed, talk to yourself. But what I mostly recommend is listening to something that you are actually interested in. As I had mentioned, listening and speaking are connected. I used to watch movies. I used to watch TV series like Friends. Yep, like 10 seasons. I used to watch Friends like for hours and hours. And I was even like, I even forgot the time was flying, you know? So I watched things based on my curiosity. So once again, listening and speaking are connected with each other. They are not too academic. You don't have to study a lot of grammar. You don't have to sit down and do a lot of tests. The more you listen to something, the better you get at speaking. But also talk to yourself.
Well, one thing, don't just like stop, because I don't want anyone to think, okay, when am I like at this age, at this point in life, when am I ever going to need it again? So like, don't just stop learning. And it's definitely like, there's a lot of different ways to learn. Some people definitely try to learn from textbook. I remember reading this book called Effortless English. It's definitely had like a few things I agree with. So I will say, like, you can always like try to study grammar or read textbooks, but like, don't try to just completely indulge yourself in like textbook English and grammar. You should like I said, I learned from like just reading and like listening. So I will say, also, sometimes textbook English just might not be exactly what you want to learn from. Try to do things that interest you. Like there's a topic that is a specific topic that interests you, like you're into music or you're into news, you're into a specific genre. You can always continue that, but in the language you're trying to learn. And also, like, I definitely know the world we live in, people are often like, they're going to be judgmental of a lot of things. They're going to be like, okay, like, why do you need this? And why do you need to do that? That's something that really annoys me. So just don't listen to them. Just try to just do what you want. You're never too old to like learn something new or to try something new. You're never too old to like do something. I know like this might seem a little off topic, but you know how people say, okay, Barbies are for little girls. That I'm 14 and I watch Barbie movies. I will still gladly have a whole collection of Barbies. So like, you're never too old for anything. Do what you want. Let people say what they want. It doesn't matter. You can like listen to them and then forget they ever said anything. It's not their business. It's your life. You do what you want.
Talk to somebody. Have a conversation in English. Just maybe you studied and maybe you went to a class at a university, or maybe for work there was something you had to do that was in English. Like maybe you read an email. Whatever you had to do, just practice getting the words out of your mouth. You just have to do it enough times for it to become more automatic. So, if you want to get strong, do push-ups. So do some push-ups this week.
I think what's really important is making a plan, right? If you want to do one thing today to help your speaking in the next month, sit down and make a very simple plan of how you're going to do that. Think about how many days a week you can study or practice. Is it an hour each time or half an hour? which days and what time. I mean, really detail. Just write down the day and the time. This is what I'm going to do, and go into detail about what you're going to do. So rather than saying, I'll watch a YouTube video, you say, I'm going to watch this YouTube video and I'm going to practice repeating or practice shadowing, and have that plan just for 2 weeks. Just make a simple plan for 2 weeks, and then you can review after 2 weeks. Because I know what happens, and this happens to me, if I make a very simple plan and think, okay, I'll decide what to do when it's time for class, I sit down for my study time and I think, right, what am I going to do? And you start searching YouTube, and then 20 minutes later, you haven't started. And so if you get prepared beforehand, even half an hour making your plan with detail, once you go into your plan and it's time to study English, boom, you go straight in, make the use of that time, and it's much better.
I would spend the week just trying to figure out what they would want to focus on and practice, and then put everything on the side, and then say to themselves, okay, for the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I'm going to focus on the R. I'm going to focus on, and choose a sound. Like, I think that is, if you're just starting out, sounds are a good place to start, because intonation could be more vague. And if you decide to do it, then find the resources for yourself, the right videos teaching you that, and practice the sound with lots of repetition. Okay, so identify the sound. I know you said one thing, but it's kind of like identify the sound and then practice it. Don't expect yourself to use it. Just practice. If it's the R, learn how to make it, and then just practice a lot of words with the R sound. Now, when we have ChatGPT and all these AI tools, it's so easy to generate lists of words, let's say, with the R sound. Specifically with the R, it's easier. With others, it's not so much. So that's it. I think, I also think it's a lot of fun. I'm biased a little bit, but I do think pronunciation work can be fun if you have the right mindset and attitude.
Definitely find the context for their English learning. So when you have a context, whether it's a pen pal, whether it's a conversation partner, whether it's some shows you watch and so on, everything just becomes so much easier. It becomes a game as opposed to an obligation. So finding the context for their English learning, super important.
I think that I should lay a lot of emphasis upon writing, because nobody's talking about writing out there. We are listening to podcasts, we are listening to audiobooks and doing all sorts of things. But I think writing is, as I mentioned, is diminishing from our society, where I don't think that we write too much nowadays. So I would suggest students to incorporate this habit of writing into their daily lives. At the end of the day, just sit down with a pen and paper and try to write about your daily routine. How did your day went on, your experiences and all those things. It will not only help you in improving your communication skills, but it will also provide you with an opportunity to do some reflection about their day. So I think, it would help you in both these ways.
Think of everything you've learned from these experts. Do you want me to keep interviewing more experts to bring you tips and advice? If you do, put let's go in the comments. And of course, make sure you like this lesson, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you're notified every time I post a new lesson. And you can get this free speaking guide where I share 6 tips on how to speak English fluently and confidently. You can click here to download it or look for the link in the description. And here's another lesson I know you'll love, so watch it now.